Hey everyone, today's interview is about multinational submissions. It's going to be about hiring, firing, and sort of getting more people involved in teams, and hopefully even talking about scientific congresses, publications, and just communications and who has appropriate compliance privileges, if you will, in those scenarios. So if you are in medical affairs, if you are in compliance, if you are doing multinational submissions, you probably care about today's discussion. Our guest today is the SVP of Global Regulatory Affairs Quality and Operational Excellence at Syros Pharmaceuticals. He's been our guest multiple times before. He's very popular. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, Ashley Preston. This is Darshan Talks live stream, and I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. I do have to say I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I'm a pharmacist, I'm not your pharmacist, so it's neither legal advice nor clinical advice. These are supposed to be just general opinions. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share. Please feel free to ask our guests questions. You can always find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks. Go to our website, darshantalks.com, and you can find Ashley on apreston@syros.com, or just find him on LinkedIn. Hey, Ashley.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's been a while since we spoke, but it's always good. And since the last time we spoke, as you mentioned, it's a new year, which comes with new challenges. So let's talk a little bit about what those challenges look like. The last time we spoke, you and I had been having a conversation about Syros expanding, needing more people. And the last time we spoke, it was difficult to hire people. Things have gotten a lot easier now, right? It's so much easier to just hire people.
I think at the end of the year, it's always a difficult time to hire between, sort of quarter 3, quarter 4. People are rounding out the year, they're committed to projects and they're looking forward to the holidays. But I think, you get into the new year, and we're in 2022 now. I think people are starting to think about the next opportunity and maybe more open to looking at new opportunities to take their next career step.
So when you're looking to hire someone in general, what are you looking for? We're not being job specific right now. We're just asking it at a 80,000 foot level. Everyone likes to pretend that the last question you should ask is how much money do you want to make? Do you think of that as a valid strategy, or do you think of it as, look, that's just mind games?
Look, I think the only person who can manage your career is yourself at the end of the day, and so everybody needs to live. Everybody, that's why we're in this game, amongst other reasons. But at the end of the day, what we are looking for, and what I'm looking for when I'm hiring people who can think, and people who can solve problems, because that is, when you boil it down, that's what we do. In drug development, particularly, you have to progress your molecules through development. And if you're in regulatory or quality, medical writing, operational excellence, you're looking to solve problems and remove roadblocks on the path of that molecule from discovery all the way to market. And so the critical factor is whether you can think on your feet and you can solve problems, and whether you can communicate clearly and effectively.
I find that to be such an interesting statement, because to me, it speaks to a cultural difference. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure you and I have discussed this before, but in case I hadn't, I grew up in India. And in India, the culture generally is, the rule comes from the top. They tell you what they want you to do. You follow those rules. The demonstration of a good employee is one who can follow the rules clearly. I've heard that that's similar to Japan, and that's similar to a lot of other places in Asia. Obviously, in Western Europe and in the US, not quite. Has that been a cultural difference for you, or has that just been my experience?
I can see where that comes from, and it's, to me, that feels like an old school approach, and it's paralleled by the idea that the person who knows the most gets promoted to be the manager, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But they have very different skill sets. You can be really technically savvy and be a great individual contributor, but that does not mean that you're able to manage people well and to lead people well. And it doesn't mean that people will be inspired or follow you. So there are different skill sets, and I think the old school approach worked to an extent that the more you know, the higher you went, and you need to know, you need to have some level of technical skill to progress, of course. But particularly in high tech areas and drug development, technology, those type of areas, high skill areas, what you really want to do is bring in the people with the best possible skill set around you, the best possible knowledge. And then to me, I think that as the leader, your job is to, one, create the environment for those experts to do their best work, and two, remove roadblocks. So, and to make things happen, to be the grease, if you like, in the machine, to make all the cogs sort of work well together and come up with the most efficient output. So, and that top-down approach just doesn't work in that environment. You might get some results in the short term, but smart people, if you're hiring in really smart people, really talented people, they're not going to stay in that environment for long.
So do you find it difficult to hire a smart person who might report to a better manager? Does that become problematic from a ego standpoint, if you will?
That's a good question. I think that if you're bringing in smart people and you are engaging them, and if you are managing the relationship as a partnership, so obviously somebody's always the boss.
Great.
But if the boss is always engaging them in a way that enables them to do their best work, to bring their knowledge, to bring their ideas, and to not stamp that out, not dampen that down, and enable them to flourish. I think smart people appreciate that, and that comes hand in hand with enabling them to grow. The idea is not that we bring people into a team and we keep them in that team forever. It's actually to grow the next generation of biotech professionals in this case. And so you do that with an understanding that you bring people in and you help them to grow, to take your job and beyond in the future. And hopefully you're doing the same thing yourself. So everybody's growing and developing, no matter where they are right now in this snapshot, that the boss or the employee, they're all growing.
So we talk about people with different skill sets. We talk about these really smart people who may be incredible, say, medical writers, maybe reporting to someone who's an incredible manager. My question for you is it about setting expectations, or is it about setting expectations up front, or is it about managing and engaging them after, or is it a combination thereof?
I think it's going to be a combination, because to get them in the door, these smart people know what they're looking for as well, and they know how they work well and what type of leadership they're looking for, and that's often a question during hiring, during interviews. I get that all the time. What's your leadership philosophy? And the good candidates, they want to know, and they want to know how we're going to work together. And so the better you can articulate that, you can then attract them to join your organization, and then you have to live it. So it's easy enough to say, but you have to actually live that, and that's how you have sustained continuous sort of professional experience. You engage people, you retain them for as long as possible as it takes to develop them. But recognizing that eventually, if you're doing your job correctly, they will grow, and they will grow beyond you.
So actually, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your leadership philosophy?
So I come back to that idea that the leader should surround themselves and hire in the best possible experts in a given area that they can, and be able to ask the right questions, stress test ideas, and engage your experts to enable them and to inspire them to do their best work and to remove roadblocks. That's how I like to operate, and I like to operate as a partnership. So ultimately, if there's a tough decision to be made, okay, it may come down to me to make that decision, but I'll do it having considered all of the options, all of the evidence, and engaged and had a conversation, dialogue with my reports, on their topic area of expertise.
So you talked about decision making at the end of the process. So obviously there's management, which is about just organizing people, and then there's decision making, which is about obviously making the decisions. And you've got really smart people around, all giving you the best advice. The perspective we just discussed a little bit earlier on was this idea of a what I'm calling an Asian approach, which is that top down. Mm-hmm. And then there's obviously the matrix approach, where everyone reports like 3, 4, 5 other people. My question for you is, has that been successful in your experience, or has that been a recipe for chaos? And is there, if you think it's been successful, what made it successful? If not, what has there been a hybrid of some kind or a third approach?
Yeah. I think that the matrix, the matrix organization is not going anywhere. I think that's what we have. That's what actually works best for drug development, because it's a team sport. No one function can own everything, and some functions are involved everywhere. Regulatory, quality are involved across the spectrum, and others come in and out at a given time during the drug development spectrum. But I think if we separate it out and we think about having multiple reports or reporting as an individual to multiple people, that can be a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
But working within a matrix, so working on being a representative of a function on a program team or a project team for a molecule, and being accountable to the team for your deliverables, but then also accountable in your line function to your manager. That's commonplace, and that's sort of easily managed. I think what is important there is that the line manager in that case sets the expectation around what is it that the regulatory lead, let's say, provides to the team, and what are they responsible for to the project team, to that matrix team, and helps them to achieve that. And so I also like to think about it as we set the deliverables for the year. Let's say we're going to do X, Y, and Z in this year, and then I leave it to my experts as to exactly how they want to achieve that, and I will help them with stress testing strategies and ideas and so on. But they with the cross-functional matrix team will work out the best way to achieve that. And if they need resources, they need help, they need roadblocks removed, then that's what I'm there to do.
So you're obviously working incredibly well in this matrix team. As we start solidifying or accepting that working from home is the new norm, has that raised new challenges for you in managing a matrix team? Now you don't have a clear team that you can have a weekly huddle with. There are multiple teams you're working with remotely across the globe. Has that been challenging? If so, how do you cope?
I think it was challenging in the beginning. If we think back to the beginning of 2020, when this COVID kicked off and we all suddenly became remote workers, for at least for a time, I think it was a challenge and it was a learning curve. But certainly I can speak for Syros. In my opinion, we jumped on that and we achieved it, and we have excelled and being able to deliver exactly what we were expected to deliver. For over the last, now we're in our third year of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we continue to deliver. It takes a little more discipline, I think, to make sure you're engaging with the teams, engaging with your colleagues, because there's no longer the water cooler conversation. There's no longer the sort of drive-by, desk visit. But on the other hand, that also gives you, I think, the ability to sometimes focus a little more, because whilst the drive-by and the water cooler conversations can generate ideas, they can also sometimes be a distraction. So if you're accessible, you can be accessible online. So we employ Microsoft Teams as our tool of choice at Syros, and there's lots of Teams messages. People can always ping you and ask you a quick question here and there, and you can answer them. But you have that ability to sort of triage those messages along the way. So if you're engaged in something, you can put yourself on silent, and people can see I'm trying to do some focused work here. I think it just takes that discipline, and something that I've done with my team as well right throughout, and we continue right throughout the pandemic, and we'll continue on, is one, as we're remote, and two, as we have team members who are not even located in the Massachusetts area, so they will always be remote. We have bi-weekly, we have a quick catch-up meeting for 30 minutes, and we try not to talk about work, and we try to use that as a way to engage and learn about each other and bond the team on a social level. And at the very least, we have that time set aside during the week. So we get to speak with each other during normal work and ad hoc, but we have that time where we just get to a little bit of downtime for the team to just bond and talk about your favorite ice cream or what you did on the weekend and so on. So try and stay away from work.
How does your team take that, by the way? I've always wondered, from a team management perspective, do they see that as a waste of time, or do they see that it's incredibly valuable from a team building perspective? Because it's one of those things that that I know that managers are struggling with. How do you build a team environment in a time when the individuals in question could be spending time with their family?
Mhm.
And it was less of an issue when they were already in the office, but is it different now that they're at home already?
Yes, yeah. So we do ours in sort of later in the afternoon, not right at the end of the day, but later in the afternoon. And it's a 30-minute slot on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it's completely flexible. If you have a meeting to go to that you need to work on, if you have work to do, that's totally fine. It's just an opportunity to drop in. And so whoever's there is there, and we just have a chat, and it's kind of like a coffee break. So if you think about when you're in the office, you have time for coffee breaks, just during the day, just to sort of de-stress and move away from the keyboard, if you like, which you're still at the screen, but you're engaging with your colleagues. And I think they enjoy it. I certainly enjoy it, and it looks like my team enjoy it. I think maybe at the beginning there might have been a couple who were sort of thinking, well, how is this going to go? But I think as the pandemic progressed, and that was really a great source of support, I think, also for the team and camaraderie as we deal with this new working environment.
So now you've landed up in a situation where you want to hire more people, you want to hire bigger teams. The big question everyone's asking right now is, A, will you hire remote workers, which is kind of a foregone conclusion, but will you pay them the same as if they were working from the office? What has been your position on pay equality, if you will, remote versus work from home? In the office.
So in terms of location wise, certainly we have a philosophy of flexible location for Xerox, and that's how we've approached our hiring. So I have team members who are actually spread across the US, in different states, and I think that philosophy enables you to access talent because the talent pool is spread everywhere. They're not all whilst there are some concentrated high-tech hubs, but there are talented people across the whole country, across the world. And so, it's a disadvantage not to enable the organization to access good talent. In terms of the actual figures and dollars, I don't typically deal with that aspect. In fact, luckily, our HR folks, they have their benchmarks, they have they have the data, and they run that and they take care of that. So, but I personally wouldn't see any rationale for doing that if it was up to me. But again, it's thankfully, they take care of that. I worry about the skill set, and they take care of the rest.
As you mentioned earlier, it's all about the experts doing what they do best, which is in this case HR deciding pay.
Precisely.
But it raises this other question. I'm going back to, I think it was Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat. And we talked about this concept of world is flat 20 years ago with this idea of knowledge process outsourcing and legal process outsourcing and blah, blah, blah. But we're really getting into the muck of it right now, where we're saying, why do I have to hire someone and train them within the US? Why can't I hire someone from Kathmandu, from wherever, and train them? Yes, there is a time gap, but if they can be trained and they can work on my submission, might as well train them at 1/10 the cost. Or are you going to pay them the same as an employee in the US?
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's I guess for small companies that can be a challenge because to actually employ folks in different countries, you've got to have a legal entity and so on, and there's a lot of considerations for that. But I think the model when you think about companies outsourcing, activities and submission management, publishing and submission management is commonly outsourced in regulatory. Certainly, it's something that we outsource at Xerox, and having providers who have global coverage. Makes perfect sense. It enables us to send something in the afternoon. People are working on it in their time zone across APAC or in Europe in our early morning, and then it comes back to us, and it's the most efficient way to go. In terms of how they manage their business and their hiring and so on, I not privy to it, but yeah, I think from an outcomes perspective, having that as a service is fantastic.
But that's always been relegated to more of the routine tasks, as opposed to what one might call the thinking tasks, strategy and the like, if you will. Do you foresee a time in the next 5 to 7 years where the strategy people are not in the U.S. anymore, are not necessarily in the U.S. anymore, because the cost differential is just too large?
I mean, I think we see that. I think we see that in large companies in any case. Certainly, in my own experience, having spent 6 years living in Singapore, we were working on strategies, and the team I had there was working on strategies which contributed to the global programs. And it was just geographically, we had our expertise there. We had folks located there. So I think for larger companies who have a global presence, that seems perfectly logical to me. For small companies, it's more difficult, as we said. Yeah. Because there's the infrastructure you have to put behind that to even be able to hire someone in a different country. And that I think can be a challenge.
Which I think is really interesting, because I think that it reminds me of this idea. Everyone's been worried about robots taking their jobs. And what they forgot is that the rest of the world is also just as easily able to take your jobs. Because everyone's talking about the value of working from home, which don't get me wrong, I enjoy quite a bit. But I always think about, where does this actually lead in the future? And it's flattening of the world, and it's the opportunities that other people who didn't have access to those opportunities are going to say, why not? Why couldn't I get access to those same things? But I guess my related question is, when you start looking for candidates you mentioned you're looking for a couple of different candidates. Since we're on here, do you want to plug which candidates you're looking for?
Sure. We have openings in my team at Xeros in regulatory affairs and in medical writing and in GCP quality.
Okay. So you're looking for these three individuals or groups of individuals. Does your HR team look only in the US right now, or does it look globally?
So as of this moment, because of the need for a legal presence and so on, we are US, looking for US candidates. Yes.
So since that's happening, do you see that companies are now, like your own, for example, are you going to now start looking in non-traditional portions of the US? So, for example, would you look in Montana? I'm not sure Montana has any kind of biotech experience, but let's assume that they have a guy there or a woman there who's very well qualified. Because I can imagine that the cost differential of living in San Francisco versus Montana is quite significant, and leveraging that might be advantageous for them. And you're seeing that with tech workers already. So I just didn't know if that's going to thought through your head.
I mean, certainly we are not influenced in any way by location within the US. So wherever the candidates sit within the US, that we can work with that. Particularly for functions where we're working with FDA predominantly and other regulatory agencies around the world, but the majority of our work is with FDA, and we're not all located in Maryland. So it's very close.
So this is such an interesting area, but let's talk a little bit about that next step. You've been talking about doing multi-country submissions at this point, and you guys are prepping for that right now. So could you talk a little bit about your experience associated with that, and how are you planning this process?
Sure, absolutely. We are planning and executing on our phase 3 study for tamibarotene, and it's a multinational study, including sites ex-US and in Europe, and even as far as Russia, Mexico. So it's definitely a multinational phase 3 pivotal study, and because of the way in which we need to roll out the clinical trial applications and the current system, although Europe now has the clinical trial regulation and the kickoff this month of the new centralized system for clinical trials. So that provides an opportunity for some centralization. But thus far, the requirement has been that you submit a clinical trial application in each of the EU markets. And then each regulator in those markets will come back with questions and requests for changes to your protocol, your INPD or your IB. And then you have to incorporate those. And so you see a diversification of the number of documents you have, and then hopefully the task is to try and harmonize them at the end of the day. But it's quite a process to take care of and to project manage. It needs a lot of coordination between regulatory, medical writing, and clinical operations to make that happen. But it's an interesting time when you're there. You start with one INPD, one protocol, one IB. You submit it across all these markets. You end up with country-specific versions to accommodate different requirements, and then the task of harmonizing and working out how you can arrive back at hopefully one single document to support and to make sure you're addressing all of the market requirements within that. And it's no small feat, that's for sure. But that's what keeps us busy.
But let's address that exact same point. There are so many markets. How do you choose where you're going to go? I mean, to me, intuitively, and I'm ignoring my entire life sciences experience. I'm going intuitively. You'd go U.S., EU, Japan because they pay the most, or India, China, Brazil because they have the most people. Maybe Russia because it's a huge landmass and covers a lot of people. But how do you make that decision?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You really have to. It's really a almost an art, when you think about it, because there are multiple factors. They include where are the people, but importantly, where are the patients? So because some diseases occur more frequently in different ethnic groups or others, and you've got the availability of a patient population that you're wanting to study in a country is very important, because of course it takes a lot of effort and a lot of resource to open up a study in a given country, and so you want to make sure that you can access a patient population there, to get the study moving and to actually be able to enroll the study. So that's one component, and then it's the speed of startup and your ability to start up in that country. So what are the requirements around the clinical trial application? How long is the startup? And not only the regulatory component, there are multiple components in there. So you have the regulatory component, you have an ethics, there's always an ethics approval, and sometimes multiple ethics boards approval. There's the site negotiations, contracts with sites, and so on, import, export. There's a plethora of things that are involved in startup. And so that timeline from deciding to go into a country to actually being able to enroll a patient in the study is quite important when you think about the strategy for your clinical trial. And then geographically, you want to in a global program, to access the number of patients you need for a large study, you have to spread geographically. But you also want to make sure that you're going to that there is a reasonably standard, a reasonably consistent standard of care in each of those markets, so that your data are comparable, because you don't want your actual efficacy output or your safety output to be influenced or biased by the standard of care in that market. Otherwise, it calls into question your trial results. So, and there are ways to manage statistically to manage that as well, stratification and so on. But you want to think carefully about that.
So it's really interesting. You start by talking about finding the patient population, and as we know that there's an entire industry on identifying patients. My question for you is, you've obviously seen 1,000 different versions of this. You've considered 1,000 different versions of this. How do you choose what is the right way to identify where your patients are?
Mm-hmm. Predominantly, so we, as is the case across the industry now, the clinical research organizations, CROs, are doing the lion's share of work of executing studies. And because of that experience, they have working for multiple sponsors, and a number of them have access or their own in-house database of patients, and they keep that updated. They are a good resource when planning the study, when you want to actually execute on a trial, engaging with a CRO and partnering with them to identify the patients. They're working with the sites on a daily basis in every country, and so they know which sites have which patients or numbers of patients available, and they also know which sites are good quality enrollers, high enrollers, or lower enrolling sites. And so that can also make a difference. And then you overlay that, so you have to make an assessment of that, and then overlay that with your speed to be able to start up in those markets. That can be affected by multiple things. COVID is also a factor. Some countries are dealing better or worse with COVID than others, and that combined with the labor shortage that resulting from COVID can cause issues in terms of startup timelines that are different to what we would have expected them to be normally. So all of those factors come into play when you're thinking about how to execute on a global study.
I can keep going, and I have so many more questions. One of the big questions I wanted to ask is just publication plan. It's completely unrelated to everything we've discussed so far, but it's a question that I've been negotiating with another sponsor recently. So I'm curious from your perspective. You're obviously getting into phase 3. You've got your phase 2B studies coming out. You are putting out publications and the like. I'm just curious, from a regulatory / quality perspective, how do you ensure that those write-ups are consistent with with FDA expectations and with quality expectations. And what I'm referring to is this idea of, do they go through PRC review, or is it too early, or do you see scientific discussion to be not subject to PRC review, and what is your thought process?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's always a factor, and it's any publication could be up for scrutiny when it's out at a conference, a poster, abstract, presentation, has to be reviewed internally. And we actually have a process by which the content is reviewed by the cross-functional group, including some of the management team at Xeros as well. So it goes through the process of the team writing the document, writing the publication, then it goes to the functional heads, which includes some of the management team as well. Then it will go through, the very last step is called the medical legal regulatory review, MLR. And that's really where we look at, and from my perspective on reviewing that, looking for any statement that could be construed as promotional, in that context, and really honing in on that and making sure that we're not crossing any line there. And it's an ongoing effort, and it's something that we take seriously, to be compliant with that, also from a legal and a medical perspective.
So you do have MLR review of your scientific discussions. There seems to be a dichotomy of views on that perspective. Some argue that scientific discussion shouldn't be subject to regulatory and legal review. Others argue that why not? And it's been interesting. So I'm just curious. I'm glad we had this conversation. We're well over time. As always, you are fascinating. So thank you for taking the time to come on. As you know, I'm going to ask you a couple of brief questions. I'm not going to ask you all the usual ones, but I'm going to ask you just one or two of them. The first one, you know this one already, but what's the best way for people to reach you?
Best way is via my email, apreston@xeros.com, or on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And the usual question, what would you like to ask the audience?
Let's see, let's go back to hiring hiring or leadership.
Sure.
What do you look for? The three factors you look for when hiring into your teams, or on the alternative, what are the three factors that you look for when you are a candidate and you're looking for great leadership in an organization?
I love it. So stay tuned to answer those questions, guys. And last question, what's something you learned in the last month?
Something I learned in the last month. Wow, the value of time off. Time to recharge. As you know, we have a new baby who turned 6 months last week, and so I'm also using up some parental leave on top, over the holiday period, to try to take a break and try to recharge a little bit, and just spend quality time doing simple things with the family. And the value of that, just to coming back to the office, then recharge and feeling like I've actually had a break and being able to spend some quality time with my family.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Congratulations on the baby, and I can't wait to have you on again soon.
Fantastic. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.